Earth had always looked to the stars with wonder and awe, wondering if they were alone in the vastness of space. The idea of alien life was more fantasy than reality, but all that changed one quiet evening when a massive ship appeared in the sky. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen, a dark silhouette against the setting sun that filled the horizon, as if it belonged to no known technology. The world watched as news broadcasts across the globe interrupted their usual programming, showing the same strange sight from every corner of Earth. And then came the message, a voice deep and resonant echoing from every device across the planet. The words were simple and chilling: "Greetings, humans, welcome to the galaxy." The message was a declaration of arrival, a first contact between humanity and the mysterious species who called themselves the Zorathians. They spoke with authority, but not with hostility, offering peace and the promise of knowledge, but also a choice that would shape Earth's future: join us or remain forgotten among the stars. Their technology was beyond comprehension. Ships that could harness the power of suns and weapons that could erase cities in a single breath. Humanity felt small for the first time in its history, faced with a question they had never considered: would they become part of this greater galactic community, or would they be left to fade into obscurity? As the world's leaders met in secret and the general public was left to speculate, the Zorathians made their intentions clear. A fleet of ships arrived in Earth's orbit in a formation that seemed to hold both awe and an unspoken threat. They didn't come to conquer, but they didn't come to help either. Their presence alone was an invitation to something much larger than humanity had ever dreamed of. The Zorathians demanded an answer within days, but before any decision could be made, they made one final statement. It wasn't a request, it was a challenge. "We are not asking you to join us, we are inviting you to prove yourselves." The words hit humanity like a bolt of lightning. What could they possibly have to prove to a race so far advanced in technology and power? The leaders of Earth were at odds. Some saw this as an opportunity to step into a new age. Others feared the implications of what such a challenge could mean. But in the face of uncertainty, there was one undeniable truth: the Zorathians had not come to destroy, they had come to test, and humanity had no choice but to accept their invitation. Weeks passed as preparations were made for the arrival of Zorathian representatives. Earth's most brilliant minds were selected to take part in the challenge, but even among the chosen few, there was a sense of dread. No one knew what the tests would involve, or what the consequences of failure would be. The world waited with bated breath for the moment when humanity would either rise to meet the challenge or falter before a galactic empire that had watched the Earth for centuries. But no one expected the Zorathians to reveal the true nature of their tests. They did not intend to judge humans by their strength alone. It would be a test of character and survival, a test of who humanity truly was deep down. The Zorathians arrived in a ship that dwarfed the largest cities on Earth. It was a marvel of technology, an endless expanse of shining metal and glass that seemed to hum with a power far beyond anything humanity had ever known. As the representatives from Earth were escorted aboard the vessel, they could feel the weight of their decision pressing on their shoulders. The air inside was cool and sterile. The walls gleamed with an alien beauty that made everything on Earth feel primitive by comparison. The humans were led to a grand chamber where a massive table stretched out before them. At the center sat the Zorathian leader, a towering figure with pale skin and eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. The leader introduced himself as Kranthak and spoke with a calm authority that made even the most seasoned diplomats uneasy. His voice echoed in the vast room as he explained the rules of the challenge. Humanity would be tested in 3 categories: strength, intelligence, and resolve. These trials would take place in different environments, each more dangerous than the last, and each designed to push the human participants to their absolute limits. There would be no mercy and no second chances. Failure was not an option. The future of humanity depended on their ability to prove they were worthy of the galaxy's respect and membership. As the humans processed this, they began to realize that the Zorathians were not interested in the trivialities of politics or diplomacy. This was a test of survival. The very survival of Earth was at stake, and they had no idea what awaited them in the coming days. Kranthak smiled, as if he could sense their growing anxiety. He reassured them that they would not be alone in these trials. they would be paired with other species from the Galactic Federation, all of whom had already passed the tests. Humanity was not the first to face such a challenge, and Kranthak's words suggested that it would be a rare honor to be allowed to even compete. The humans were then shown to a ship unlike any they had ever seen. Its sleek black surface was illuminated by a strange blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ship seemed alive, as if it were an extension of the Zorathians themselves. As they boarded the craft, the reality of what they were about to face set in. They were to journey into the unknown, to places that no human had ever gone before. They were not just entering another world. They were stepping into a realm where their every move would be watched by countless alien eyes. The first destination was a planet that orbited a dying star. The surface was rocky and barren, with violent storms that seemed to rage constantly. The challenge here would test the humans' ability to endure extreme conditions. But the danger was not just in the weather, it was in the creatures that roamed the planet, massive predatory beasts that hunted in packs and were drawn to the slightest sound. The humans were briefed on the creatures' habits and weaknesses, but there was no guarantee that any of them would make it out alive. As the ship descended into the planet's atmosphere, the humans felt their stomachs lurched with the pressure. The very air seemed to crackle with energy. The door opened, and they were thrust into a world of chaos, where survival was the only thing that mattered. There was no time to waste, no time to question whether they were ready. They had been chosen for this moment, and now they had to prove they could survive it. The air was thick with the smell of ozone. As the humans stepped out onto the rocky surface of the alien planet beneath them, the ground trembled with the violent storms that howled across the landscape. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the twisted terrain and casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. The sky was a sickly shade of red and orange, the dying star looming overhead, casting an eerie glow on everything below. The humans quickly realized they were not alone. Massive creatures lurked in the shadows, their silhouettes barely visible against the tumultuous backdrop. The first roar shattered the air, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through their bones. The humans scattered instinctively, some instinctively reaching for weapons that weren't there, others trying to find shelter behind jagged rocks. But the creatures were fast, their claws like knives tearing through the air with frightening precision. The team leader, Captain Sarah Delaney, shouted for everyone to regroup and follow her. She knew they couldn't outrun the beasts, but they could outsmart them. They would need to work together to survive this challenge, and the clock was ticking. They had no idea how much time they had before the Zorathians would consider them failures. As the first of the creatures lunged at one of the participants, a young scientist named Daniel, the group sprang into action. Daniel ducked and rolled out of the way just in time as the creature's claws scraped across the ground where he had just been standing. With a sharp command, Sarah directed two others to draw the creature's attention while she and the rest of the team worked to formulate a plan. Using their limited resources, they quickly realized that the environment itself could be used against the beasts. The violent storms seemed to affect the creature's senses. They were disoriented by the constant barrage of lightning and heavy winds. After several failed attempts at an offensive strategy, Sarah ordered the group to use the storm to their advantage. They led the creatures into an open field where the storms were most intense, and then used the magnetic pulses from the lightning strikes to set off explosions in nearby rock formations. The resulting shockwaves sent the creatures into a frenzy, and with coordinated timing the humans were able to trap them beneath falling debris. It was a tense moment as they watched the massive creatures struggle beneath the rubble, but the storm raged on, and the humans had no time to celebrate their victory. They had to move fast. They still needed to prove they could survive on this hostile world, and their trial was far from over. With the first threat neutralized, the humans moved on to the next challenge. Their mission now was to find and retrieve a piece of technology hidden deep within the planet's core. The Zorathians had made it clear that this was not a simple search and rescue operation. The core was a labyrinth of tunnels and shifting rock where every turn could lead to a dead end, or something far worse lurking in the shadows. They entered the maze-like caverns with nothing but their instincts and the faint glow of their lights to guide them. Every step was a risk, every decision crucial. They had no idea what would be waiting for them at the heart of the planet. but they knew they couldn't afford to fail. As they descended deeper into the caverns, the air grew colder, and the darkness more suffocating. There was no sign of the technology they were meant to retrieve, but the eerie quiet only heightened their sense of unease. And then they heard the faint click of footsteps behind them, as if they weren't the only ones navigating this twisted underworld. The challenge was far from over, and the true danger was only just beginning. The sound of footsteps grew louder and closer until the humans realized they weren't imagining it. Something was following them through the darkness. With each turn of the labyrinth, the sense of being hunted became more palpable. The tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed to move, and every scrape against the rock sent the team on edge. Sarah ordered everyone to stay close and remain silent. The last thing they needed was to alert whatever creature was stalking them. They had no idea what it was or how it had followed them, but they knew one thing for certain: they weren't alone. Their lights flickered and dimmed as they moved deeper into the caves, the oppressive cold creeping into their bones with each step. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint energy, a hum that resonated deep within the rock. It wasn't just a planet, it was alive, and something else seemed to be waking up beneath them. The team tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, focusing instead on the task ahead, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. And then they saw it, a glimmer in the distance, faint and almost imperceptible, but it was enough to spark hope in their hearts. It was a faint light coming from a chamber deep in the caves, a sign that they were getting closer to the technology they were meant to retrieve. The closer they got, the more the humming grew louder, vibrating through the air like a low-frequency pulse. Sarah raised her hand, signaling the team to stop. She motioned for them to take cover behind the rocks and remain hidden until they could figure out what was ahead. The last thing they needed was to stumble into the unknown without any preparation. They waited in silence, hearts pounding in their chests, the dark shapes moving just out of their line of sight, but they knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The chamber was just ahead, and whatever lay inside would determine whether they failed or succeeded in this trial. Sarah gave the signal, and they moved forward cautiously, with weapons drawn ready for whatever might come next. As they entered the chamber, the light grew brighter, but it wasn't the glow of the technology they had come to find. It was something far worse. The walls of the cavern were lined with glowing tendrils pulsating with an unnatural light, and at the center of the room was a massive creature coiled around a strange device, its body a mass of shifting darkness that seemed to flicker in and out of existence as if it were made from the shadows themselves. The creature's eyes glowed with an unsettling intelligence, and for a moment the humans froze. It knew they were there. Before Sarah could give the order to retreat, the creature lunged its body, a blur of motion faster than any human could react. It knocked two of the team members aside with a single strike, and they were sent tumbling across the rocky floor. Sarah screamed at the others to move and opened fire on the creature, but the shots seemed to have no effect. The beast's form shifted with every bullet that hit it, as if it were made of liquid darkness. The team was in a desperate fight for survival. They had to think fast. The creature was too powerful for them to defeat in open combat, so Sarah ordered a retreat. They sprinted back toward the exit of the chamber, hoping to lose the creature in the winding tunnels, but it followed them relentlessly, its presence like a shadow on their heels. They needed to get to the surface, and fast, but there was only one way out, and it led directly through the heart of the beast's lair. They were trapped. The humans had no choice but to fight their way through the dark creature that had trapped them. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time as the beast's massive form closed in on them. The air grew thick with its presence. Every movement seemed to distort the space around it, as if reality itself bent in response to its power. The creature roared, and the sound vibrated through their bones, sending a shockwave of fear through the team. But Sarah refused to give up. She couldn't let this be the end, not after everything they had already been through. With no weapons that could harm it, she quickly assessed their surroundings. The chamber was too small to run, and the creature's agility was terrifying. She needed to think of something, anything that could give them an advantage. The glowing tendrils along the walls suddenly sparked an idea. They weren't just for decoration. The creature was drawn to the energy pulse from them. And in that moment, Sarah realized that the beast wasn't invincible. It was tethered to the energy in the chamber. She yelled at the team to move, and they scrambled toward the glowing tendrils with the creature hot on their heels. One of the team members managed to grab a nearby piece of rock and use it to disrupt the energy flow for a brief moment. A loud crack echoed as the tendril broke, and the chamber flickered with a violent pulse. The creature shrieked and recoiled from the energy, its form momentarily disintegrating and then reforming again in a jagged blur. But the break in the flow was enough to give the humans an opening. Sarah seized it and led the team toward the shattered tendril, where the creature seemed momentarily distracted. As they made their way through the chaos, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation. This wasn't just a test of survival anymore, it was a battle for their very lives, and the stakes had never been higher. They needed to escape and complete the challenge, or else the galaxy would view them as failures, and that failure could mean the end of humanity's future among the stars. They ran through the caverns, their every breath ragged and desperate, but the creature pursued them relentlessly with each turn. It was closer, each breath felt heavier, the darkness of the caverns pressing in on them. They could feel the cold of the planet's core seeping into their bones, their muscles aching from the constant sprinting, but they couldn't stop, they couldn't give in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they burst out of the tunnels and into the open air of the planet's surface. The storm still raged around them, the sky crackling with energy, and the wind howling, but the creature hesitated at the entrance to the caverns. It could not cross the threshold of the cave's energy field, a barrier that had been set in place by the Zorathians to prevent the beast from leaving the planet. Sarah glanced back for a moment, catching her breath. The creature's glowing eyes watched them from the dark depths, but it did not follow. They had survived the first trial, but it had come at a cost. 2 members of the team were down, injured and unable to continue, and they had barely managed to escape with their lives. Sarah knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Zorathians were watching them closely, and they would not be lenient. The next trial would be even harder than the first. But they had proven one thing today: humanity was not so easily defeated, and the galaxy would soon learn that humans were a force to be reckoned with. They had barely caught their breath before the next trial began. As soon as the humans returned to the Zorathian ship, the doors slid shut behind them. With a resounding thud, they were escorted to a new chamber, one that was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the dark and brutal world they had just escaped. The Zorathians didn't waste any time. They had seen the humans survive the creature, but now they would test humanity's resolve in a different way. This trial would be a test of their minds, not just their bodies. They were given a set of complex puzzles and simulations designed to challenge their intelligence and their ability to adapt under pressure. But there was a deeper challenge hidden within it, a trial of trust. The room was filled with enormous holographic screens showing different parts of the galaxy, distant planets, and uncharted territories. Each screen displayed an alien world with its own set of problems, from resource shortages to hostile environments. The humans were tasked with finding solutions for these planets within a strict time limit. Failure would mean the loss of that world's future. But even more ominous than the ticking clock were the other teams who participated in the trial. These weren't just other human teams, but alien species from across the Federation. Each species had their own method of thinking, their own approach to problems, and each was watching the humans closely. As the simulation began, the humans quickly realized that the challenge was not just about solving problems, it was about how they solved them. Their decisions would affect not only the outcome of the simulation, but the standing of humanity in the eyes of the Federation. Should they succeed, but more importantly, the other species were watching for a different kind of answer, not just intelligence or ingenuity, but ethics. How far were the humans willing to go for the sake of success? The first test was a dilemma on a planet where 2 neighboring species were on the brink of war over a scarce resource. The humans could either choose to negotiate a peaceful solution or take the resource by force and provide it to one of the species. The goal was clear: save the planet. But the method was not so simple. The negotiations would take time and would require immense trust between the humans and the other species. Meanwhile, the option to take the resource by force would guarantee immediate success, But at the cost of creating a lasting enemy for humanity in the galaxy, Sarah took the lead in this decision, knowing it could either strengthen or fracture the reputation of Earth forever. As they deliberated, the alien species watched closely, their eyes narrowed with every passing second. The pressure was mounting, the clock ticking down, and every second that passed felt heavier. Sarah knew what the right choice was, but it wasn't an easy one. She called for a vote among her team, and after a tense silence, they all agreed to attempt diplomacy. Their decision was met with a mix of reactions from the other species. Some respected their approach, while others viewed it as weak. Sarah knew they had made the right choice, but that didn't mean the trial was over. The next test was even harder. It involved a planetary evacuation, where the only available means of saving an entire population was to leave behind a portion of the people on a dying world. To make room for the others, the humans had to decide who would stay and who would go, and they had mere minutes to make the decision. As they began to sort through the data and assess the needs of the population, the weight of their responsibility grew overwhelming. The team argued heatedly as emotions ran high, but in the end they chose a fair and equitable solution, one that ensured no one was left behind unless absolutely necessary. When the simulation ended, the results were unclear. The Zorathians gave no feedback. They simply watched the humans carefully, as if evaluating them on something deeper than their choices, something about the way they approached the trials. As the doors opened and the team was led out of the chamber, they felt a sense of unease. They had survived, but the Zorathians were not impressed by just their intellect or their compassion. They were testing humanity's very soul, and their resolve would be measured in ways they could not yet understand. The trial was far from over, and with each test humanity was revealing more than they had ever intended about what it meant to be human. The humans were exhausted physically and mentally, but the Zorathians weren't done with them. Yet as they exited the chamber, they were taken to another part of the ship, a vast open arena. This time it was different. The air was thick with tension, and there was no light other than the eerie glow of the Zorathian technology that pulsed from the walls. The humans stood in a circle, looking at one another, trying to make sense of what was happening. Sarah's mind was racing. The previous trials had tested their minds and their hearts, but this felt different. This was a test of something deeper, something more primal. The doors behind them slammed shut, and a deep voice echoed from above. "This trial will test your resolve in a way you cannot prepare for. It will be a trial of survival and sacrifice." Sarah tensed her grip on the weapon at her side instinctively. It was then that the floor beneath them began to shift. The ground trembled, and the arena was transformed into a new environment, a dark forest with towering trees and thick underbrush. The sky overhead was filled with swirling clouds that seemed to change shape and color with every passing second. It was a jungle, but not one from Earth. It was a place that felt alien yet eerily familiar. The humans looked around, confused and disoriented, but they quickly realized this wasn't just an environmental challenge. They were being hunted again, but this time it wasn't just the creature from before. They were surrounded by predators, but they couldn't see them. The entire forest seemed alive with hidden dangers. The trees were alive with movement, and the ground itself seemed to shift as they walked. The air was thick with the sound of unseen creatures stalking through the brush. The trial had begun. The team's first instinct was to stick together, but Sarah knew that wouldn't be enough. They needed to be smart. They needed to use the environment to their advantage. The predators were clearly attuned to movement and sound, so the group had to move slowly and carefully. One by one, they made their way deeper into the forest, avoiding the creatures they could hear but not see. The tension was unbearable. With each step, the air seemed to grow heavier, and every rustling noise sent their hearts racing. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, one of the team members, Jason, stepped on a branch. It snapped loudly, and the sound echoed through the trees. Before he could react, something leaped from the shadows and attacked him. The creature was a blur of claws and teeth. The others rushed to help, but it was too late. Jason was already down, and they barely managed to drive the creature off before it could do more damage. Sarah felt the weight of the loss settle over her. It was the first casualty in their trials, and it was a reminder of how real this challenge had become. The danger wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was real. People were dying, and every choice they made could cost them someone else. They moved on, but the loss of Jason weighed heavily on them. They had to keep moving, they had to survive. But the jungle seemed to grow darker with each passing hour. The predators were closing in, and they had to make decisions fast. Should they risk crossing a river they couldn't see the depth of, or take shelter in the trees where the predators were known to be more aggressive? Sarah knew they had no choice but to take risks. The longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. But every choice was a gamble, and with each gamble came the possibility of losing more lives. They made it to a clearing, and for a moment thought they were safe, but that was when the ground beneath them began to shake again. The earth split open, and out of the fissure rose a towering figure. Its form, unlike anything they had seen before, it was a massive creature made of molten rock and fire. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and its roar shook the very air they stood on. They were no longer facing just predators. They were facing something far worse, something ancient and powerful. They had no choice but to face it if they wanted to survive, if they wanted to prove they were worthy of the galaxy. They had to face the creature head-on. The fight for survival had just become even more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The creature towered over them, its molten body radiating heat that made the air shimmer with intensity. It was an elemental force of nature made of fire and rock. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its roar rattled their bones. The humans stood frozen for a moment, caught between fear and resolve. But Sarah was the first to move. She shouted to the others to regroup and quickly formulated a plan. They couldn't defeat it by conventional means. They had no weapons that could penetrate its rocky hide, no ammunition that could stop its fiery onslaught. But they had something else. They had their wits and their unity. They had to outsmart the creature or die. Trying with quick precision, they began to move as one. The first step was to use the terrain. The ground beneath them was unstable with cracks and crevices formed by the constant tremors. They had to move quickly and use the cracks to their advantage. Sarah led the way, leaping from one boulder to the next. As she guided the team to a higher vantage point, the creature moved with incredible speed, but it wasn't built for agility. Its massive form struggled to keep up with the nimble humans who darted through the chaos. The others followed Sarah's lead, some of them creating distractions, while others searched for anything that could help them survive. The environment was unforgiving, but it was their best chance. They had to outlast the creature until it made a mistake, until it overextended itself. Just as the creature roared again, a massive wave of fire tearing through the air. Sarah spotted something ahead, a cluster of jagged rocks at the edge of the clearing. They could use it to create a trap, but they needed to time it just right. As the creature barreled toward them, its fiery breath lighting up the jungle in a wave of destructive heat, the humans scrambled to the rocks. Sarah signaled for them to take cover behind the boulders. As the creature advanced, their plan was simple: lure the creature to a narrow part of the clearing, where it would be forced into the trap they had set. Using the environment to their advantage had worked so far, but it was now or never. They had to make the creature follow them without being caught in the firestorm. The moment of truth came when the creature lunged at one of the team members, its molten claws scraping the rocks behind them in a deafening sound. Sarah knew it would follow them until it was too late. She gave the signal to pull back, and with a last-ditch effort they led the creature straight into the narrow passageway. The trap was set. The team leaped from their positions. As the creature charged forward with a thunderous crash, it collided with the jagged rocks. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and for a moment the creature faltered, its massive body struggling to free itself. The team didn't hesitate. They took advantage of its momentary weakness and attacked. They aimed for the cracks in its rocky body, the weak points where the heat and pressure were concentrated. They fired everything they had, hoping to destabilize the creature. But it wasn't enough. The creature roared in fury and began to rise again. The humans were out of time. They had to do something drastic to finish it. In a final act of desperation, Sarah made a split-second decision. She led the team into the heart of the creature's attack zone and used a combination of explosives and strategic placement to collapse the ground beneath it. The shock of the explosion destabilized the creature's form, causing it to collapse into the fissure below the ground, shaking violently. As the creature's body crumbled into the depths with a final roar, it was gone. For a moment, there was silence. The jungle had fallen still. The humans were alive, but battered, bruised, and covered in dust, they had made it through the final trial. The Zorathians stood watching from above, their eyes unreadable. But the humans knew the truth. They had faced the impossible and survived. They had proven to themselves and the galaxy that humanity could endure, that humans were not just survivors but warriors who would never back down, no matter the odds. They had earned their place in the stars, and the future of Earth was now secured among the galaxy's most respected civilizations. As they stood in the clearing, exhausted and victorious, Sarah looked out at the stars above, knowing that this was only the beginning of humanity's journey into the unknown. The trials were over, but the real challenges were just beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but humanity was ready to face them with all the courage and determination they had shown in those brutal trials.